You're watching The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales, streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
Okay, I'm live. I got to get better used to that. All right, it is Wednesday here on The Experience. I haven't slept. I stayed up last night watching the new episode of Moon Knight, and then I couldn't sleep after worrying about my man Khonshu. But we're not here to talk about that today. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. Our topic today is going to be Valiant Entertainment, the comic company you should be reading more of, here on the Dan Wickline Show. Stay tuned. All right, folks, today we are going to talk about Valiant Entertainment, Valiant Comics, however you refer to them. And I know a lot of people out there don't know the company as well as some of the other ones. So I thought this is a good day just to spend talking about Valiant Comics. You know, they're a great little company. They have a lot of talent there. They put out a lot of good books, a lot of good characters. But they've got a pretty interesting history, and I'm going to go into it. But the reason it came up is last night on In Stores This Week, Kyle, Jay, and I were talking about the 8th issue of Shadow Man. That's from Colin Bunn, and it's wrapping up an 8-issue run he did with a couple different artists, and it's going to go into Book of Shadows, which will be the next story arc. But as I was doing the review, I said that while I love the Valiant characters and would kill to write Nim Jack or Bloodshot or just about any of them, when it comes to Shadow Man, I would tell him just to keep Colin Bunn on it. I got to say that I'm really loving what he's done with the character recently. And I also really like what Colin Kelly and I think it's Jack Lansing are doing on The Harbinger. Those are two really good books right now. So with all that in my mind, I thought, you know what? Valiant is like the third biggest and most defined cohesive universe in comics. But it's really not that well known. So that's why I decided I'm going to spend the day focused on the publisher, their history, their characters, what they're doing now, and what their upcoming plans are. So let's just dub this Valiant Day. This is Valiant Day. And to join me on Valiant Day, this is Bloodshot Bear. He was a special bear made by Build-A-Bear. You can see the Build-A-Bear logo. For the New York Comic Con. It's got the logo on the back there. For 2017, and my good friend at the time, Hunter Gorson, he's still a friend, he just isn't at Valiant anymore. I had gotten to know him because of the Nim Jack versus the Valiant Universe thing they did. But I said, hey, if you have any extra left over, let me know, and I'll buy one. And he just sent me one anyway. Didn't have to pay for it. He's my little buddy. I've had him around for 5 years now, and he's going to join us for the show right over here. Don't fall over and make me look bad. I'd be kind of upset by that. And I've noticed you don't have guns, so I'm not scared of you. Just saying. All right. Now, while all of you out there are thinking I'm crazy, most of you probably already knew that, let's dive into the characters and the company of Valiant. Now, like many things in life, Valiant started off with a failure. In 1988, former editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, Jim Shooter, hooked up with lawyer Steve Masarski and a group of investors, and they put in a bid to buy Marvel Comics. But they were outbid by financier Ron Perlman, and we all know how that ended up working out. Well, Shooter and his crew of investors thought, well, we've already got our money together. We've got this thing to go. Why don't we just put out our own Universe, our own group of characters and stuff. So they created something called Voyager Communications in 1989, and then they created the Valiant imprint and went out to try to recruit as many writers and artists from Marvel as they could. And these include like Barry Windsor Smith, Bob Layton, a couple of the bigger names at the time. And they put together an interconnected universe of characters. But instead of just trying to create all new ones, they mixed those characters, these new characters they were creating, with a series of characters that they licensed from a group called Western Publishing. And Western Publishing at the time had Magnus Robot Hunter, Solar Man of the Atom, and Turok Dinosaur Hunter, which were the old Gold Key comic characters. So basically what they did was they created a bunch of new characters and intermixed them with these older ones so that when readers would come to it, they'd get the older fans because they'd recognize Magnus and Turok and stuff like that, where the newer fans or the younger fans would be, oh, hey, we're getting on the ground floor or something. So it was an interesting mix. Now, they launched their first book in 1991, which was Magnus Robot Hunter, and that came out with a cover date of May. The next one to come out was Solar Man of the Atom. Again, both licensed characters. Then they went to two original titles, Ray and Harbinger. Now, the company really was successful when it started out. They won the Best Publisher Under 5% Market Share award in 1992. And then in the very next year, they won the Best Publisher Over 5% Market Share because they had grown that much. And they were the first publisher besides DC or Marvel to win that award. So they really made a good name for themselves very quickly. Let me get a drink real quick. Now, they would also start doing some other stuff. They did a crossover with another relatively new publisher at the time, Image Comics. They did this thing called Unity that brought the Valiant characters mixed in with like Wildcats and Spawn and Youngblood and stuff like that. So you had the two companies' main characters intermixing. And then from that, they'd go out to release Bloodshot, Nim Jack, Hard Corpse, and HARD is an acronym. I don't remember what it is, and they also introduced Time Walker and The Second Life of Dr. Mirage. Now, like I said, while the company looked good on the surface, though, there was a lot of tension underneath. Behind the scenes, there was this artistic difference going on, or directional difference between Jim Shooter and Masarsky and the investors. And by the end of 1992, and it depends on who you ask, Shooter either left or was asked to leave. Now, 2 years later, without Shooter, I'm going to drink again real quick, excuse me. 2 years later, without Shooter's guidance or whatever the cause, Voyager Communications ended up being bought out by video game developer Acclaim. And the comics ended up becoming Acclaim Comics. And they did kind of a soft reboot of all the characters. Now, this led to also a few video games being launched that included the Valiant characters. There is Shadow Man, which has been re-released recently. I think I actually saw an ad for it. Maybe not. I don't know if they put ads in trades. But there was. Maybe I'm missing it. All right. Anyway, so they re-released the Shadow Man recently. There's also a Turok Dinosaur Hunter game, an Armorines Project Swarm game. And then, probably what might be the most interesting is they actually had this crossover game called Heavy Metal that featured Exo Man of War and Iron Man. I don't remember ever seeing that one, but it's supposed to be out there. Now, Acclaim had a stroke of bad luck, though. They got outbid, again, people being outbid, on a major sports video game license. And this basically made them financially insolvent, forced them into bankruptcy. Now, once in bankruptcy, things got divided up. The licensed characters that Valiant had published, Solar, Magnus, and Turok, they reverted back to their original owners. And I think it was actually a different company that then got bought out by DreamWorks, which then got bought out by Universal. So now those characters are owned by Universal Studios. So if you're ever going to see a Solar, Magnus, or Turok movie, it's going to be from Universal. The original characters they did were put up for auction, and an investment group got together and bought them, and they ended up forming a company that would become called Valiant Entertainment. And this took place in 2005. Now, the group was led by Dinesh Shamdasani and Jason Kothari. And the first thing they did was they hired Jim Shooter. But they didn't hire him to run the company. There you go. Thank you, JD. JD's got the Shadow Man remaster trailer. Now, they hired Jim Shooter to write some original short stories of the characters that they then included when they did these hardcover reprints of the original Valiant comics. So immediately to get things going, it was a very smart move. They didn't immediately jump into putting out new comics. They took the backlog of the back catalog they had, and they reissued it in these hardcovers so that they could then start generating some revenue. It was a brilliant idea. Now, they also then went out and hired a lot of people with experience from either Marvel Comics or Wizard, actually. Fred Pierce came from Wizard. I used to know him when he was running the Wizard World shows, and he went on to be the publisher. Warren Simon was a major editor over at Marvel, and he ended up going over to Valiant as their new editor-in-chief. Peter Cuneo and his brother Gavin came over to be chairman of the board and COO. So they brought in a lot of experienced comic people to take over. And they really came up with a good business strategy of not flooding the market, putting together just a handful of really strong titles. But then when one would end, they would do like 8, 10, 12 episode issues, and they would end it, and then they would go to a different character. So they were never asking their readers to spend so much money. It was always balanced. Good afternoon, Mark. Happy Wednesday. Yep. Yeah, I'm a big Valiant fan as well. If you have any questions, feel free to ask away. Or if you know something I missed, please speak up. All right, so they kicked off what they called in 2012. So they really took their time to put this together. And in 2012, they launched what they called the Summer of Valiant, which was 4 new ongoing titles. There was Exo Man of War, Harbinger, Bloodshot, and Artron Armstrong. Now, Exo was the first in May, and that had Robert Venditti and Carrie Nord as the artist on that. And Carrie Nord had just come off of doing Conan for Dark Horse and just was doing some amazing work, and he just kind of carried that right over. Barry Windsor Smith was a major part of the beginnings of Valiant. He was one of the guys they headhunted from Marvel, and he's credited for co-creating a lot of these characters. So, Harbinger was the next one to come out, And that was actually written by Josh Dysart, an old friend of mine, and artist Carrie Evans. And then Bloodshot was next by, he's kind of a crime writer, Dwayne Zrazinski, and artist Manuel Garcia. And then finally, Artron Armstrong, which is more of the light-hearted heroic duo. And that was from Fred Van Lente and Clayton Henry. And after a few months in November rolled around, they brought up Shadow Man by Justin Jordan and Patrick Zurcher. So they really kicked off their first year with 5 titles. And, you know, they really started building things back up again. They got people's attention. And then some titles would reach their planned conclusion and new ones would launch. So, you know, they wrapped up Archer and Armstrong. They launched Quantum and Woody. You know, they finished up another book. Then The Eternal Warrior got to come out. And this became kind of their regular pattern, with other titles like The Death-Defying Dr. Mirage, Nim Jack, Ray, Imperium, Ivar, Time Walker, Divinity, and The Delinquents all coming out over the years whenever one series would end. So they were constantly putting like new stuff out. But again, it never felt like it got old. It never felt like, oh, they're really kind of, you know, getting into the doldrums of Exo Man of War. When Exo Man of War got to the natural conclusion of its story, he would go away for a little bit and somebody else would step up. You know, Eternal Warrior would get a chance to have 6, 8, 10 issues, and then that would change up again too. Now, let me pick up where I was. Oh, this would be a pattern until 2016, when Shamdasani announced that the company was actually going to try to expand past their core titles. Because at this point, just about all the books they did were some variation on characters that they had already had when they bought. I mean, I think Divinity was new, but they announced Faith would get her own series. She was a spin-off of the Harbinger series, and Generation Zero was announced. And it's around the same time that they decided to do a live-action series, but it wasn't meant for TV or the movies. It was actually meant for YouTube. So they got these great YouTube creators, a father and son team who go by Bat in the Sun Productions. And they do a lot of what if, you know, these two superheroes would fight, you know, Green Arrow versus Hawkeye, Flash versus Quicksilver, stuff like that. They do these great things. And they were putting together this series called Nim Jack versus the Valiant Universe. And they went out and they cast Michael Rowe, who had played Deadshot on the Arrow series, and he'd been in a bunch of other things, to play Nim Jack. And they got Jason David Frank he of course was the Green Ranger and the White Ranger. He was cast as Bloodshot. And they had some other actors and stuff. Nobody really bigger than those two names. But they filmed it here in Los Angeles. It was really cool. I actually got a chance to go down and spend the day on set. Got to interview both those gentlemen. And really enjoyed it. Was looking forward to the release, and a lot of weird things happened after that. And it was kind of a big red warning sign, because DMG Entertainment owned 50% of Valiant. And they had made deals with Sony and a couple other companies to use these characters in live action. While it didn't technically break that contract, a lot of those companies were upset by this little mini series, where it didn't make sense to me. I thought, hey, you're getting your characters out there. But what happened is that they delayed the release of the Nim Jack series. It finally did come out. So you can find it on YouTube. There's a trailer out there, but I saw someone earlier today has the actual series on it. But originally it was only released on comicbook.com. It was only available for like a couple weeks, and then it disappeared. And this was all to keep the companies that had made the deals happy. And in 2018, DMG would eventually acquire full ownership of Valiant. Shamdasani and Quinio would exit the company. A few others would stay for a while. I know Warren Simmons stuck around for a little while, but eventually left. And a good chunk of the original team that put Valiant Entertainment together ended up going over and forming Bad Idea Comics. So what led Shooter to leave Valiant? Originally, Shooter left Valiant because he had some differences on what he wanted to do with the company versus the original investors. And I'm not sure if you ask Shooter, he left. If you ask, what was his name again? Masarsky, Shooter was asked to leave, but it was basically a difference on the direction of the company, and they asked Shooter to leave. So he was brought back to do short stories by this group, but they were only to do that. All right, we're going to take our first break right here, and we will come back and get into what happens after Dinesh and his crew left, and get into some of the characters and stories that are going on. So we'll be right back.
Imagine being at a convention and going to an interview panel that's just for you. No bustling crowds, no hours-long lines, just you, the moderator, and your favorite comic book creators. Well, this is pretty much that. Miss Jen sits down every week with 2 comic book creators for a live stream interview about their latest work, and you can ask them whatever you want. It's Talking Shop, Mondays at 5 Eastern on The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales.
There's something for every imagination at your local comic shop. Visit comicshoplocator.com to find a store near you.
Did you know that every Experience show, including some exclusive content, streams on Twitch? Check it out, twitch.tv/the_EXP. Or just scan that QR code.
Hey everybody, welcome back. It is Wednesday here on The Experience, and before we jump back into our topic, I just want to remind you guys that I am now doing a Pick of the Week comic, a comic that I think is A, really damn good, B, maybe a great cover or something because I like variants on some things, and C, pertaining to something going on in the pop culture zeitgeist. That said, I have picked the Moon Knight series, Moon Knight #1, which is written by Jed MacKay, drawn by Alessandro Cappuccio, and there's multiple versions of the covers on this one. There's a Steve McNiven original cover. There is a John Romita Jr. cover. A lot of different great covers of it out there. Personally, my favorite is this one right here. This is where the Pick of the Week is going to live from now on. So when I change to a new one, a new book will be up there. But this is my Pick of the Week right now. This is Moon Knight #1, covered by Gerardo Zaffino. Now, I recommend it. It's a great series. It ties into, of course, the series going on right now, which had the 3rd episode last night. We're going to do a spoiler conversation about tomorrow. But if you want to get this book, I recommend either reaching out to your local comic shop. If you don't know where your local comic shop is, check out comicshoplocator.com, put in your zip code. They will tell you where one is. If your local comic shop doesn't have it, or you don't have a local comic shop like well, then I would tell you to go where I got mine, dynamicforces.com. We got a link in the chat right now, both for the comic shop locator and for Dynamic Forces for this particular cover. There's also CGC graded versions of it on dynamicforces.com. So if you're a person who likes to have your books slabbed, Dynamic Forces has it covered for you. So check it out. Moon Knight #1, Gerardo Zaffino cover. That is just really gorgeous. And with everything going on in that series, oh man, I can't get enough Moon Knight. So now let's get back into our main topic. Before we jump though in, I want to finish up with Mark. Mark said, what led Shooter to leave Valiant? I told you why, but what he did next was interesting. He got more investors. He started another company called Defiant and started with a book called Warriors of Plasm. So that's not our topic of today, but just so you know that when Shooter left or was asked to leave, depending on who you ask, he did continue in the industry, started up another publishing company, but didn't have quite the success that he did here. And Random says, howdy, what's going on today? We're doing a deep dive into Valiant Comics, just giving you guys more about the information and past, present, and future of Valiant Comics, like it says right there. And we're going to get back to the presentation. Warriors of Plasm is awesome. Yeah, I wish they would have done more with that. I think Defiant had some potential, but never really made it happen. All right. The next big thing that happened for Valiant as a company was both good and bad, because with all the other changes going on in 2018, there was also the announcement that Vin Diesel had been cast to play Bloodshot in a major motion picture. Now, this is great until it got released. And the reason it's not good when it got released is it got released right around the time of the pandemic starting, when things were just starting to shut down. People were afraid to go into theaters. It was the worst time to debut a brand new character in a brand new movie in theaters. And it just didn't do well. I think it was in theaters for like 2 weeks until it was completely shut down. And then they pushed it right out onto video on demand almost immediately. And the critics were not kind to this movie at all. If you look on Rotten Tomatoes, they scored a 30% from the critic review. Now, what's interesting though is that, like a lot of genre films, the audience score was a much more respectable 78%. So you can see that where the critics just didn't get it, fans did. And the film followed the character's origins fairly well. I mean, if you were a fan of the character, you probably got into this, and it's not that far off, but it had a very Memento style of telling the story, if you're familiar with the Christopher Nolan film Memento. And what was really interesting is that they were doing this Memento style film, that they got the lead actor from Memento to be the antagonist in this movie, Guy Pearce. He plays the doctor that kind of puts Bloodshot together. You've also got Isa Gonzalez, Sam Heughan from Outlander, Toby Cabell, who was in the really, really bad Fantastic Four movie, and Lamorne Morris from New Girl. So you had a pretty interesting cast. If you haven't seen the movie, it's actually pretty good. I enjoyed it. I've watched it, and Lisa and Brayden both watched it, where they were a little hesitant on the movie. Once they realized it was kind of a Memento-style story, they really got into it, and it hooked them. So, like I said, I personally like the movie. My only knock against it is that it leans a little more into being a Vin Diesel movie rather than being a Bloodshot movie. It's the thing Marvel doesn't do. You know, Marvel hires an actor to play a character. They're not banking on him just being that. You know, they wanted Robert Downey Jr. to be Tony Stark. They wanted Chris Evans to be Captain America. Here, they let Vin Diesel be Vin Diesel. but then he doesn't have the greatest acting range. So I know Vin Diesel's probably going to try to show up here, or might show up here and try to kick my ass. Oh well. All right. Now, Vin Diesel was bad cast. Anyone else does Bloodshot, the movie would have soared. Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you. I think they needed Diesel to get the investors and Sony excited about it. But I think they would have been better off either getting a no-name or, I mean, hell, just watching Oscar Isaac in Moon Knight. Oscar Isaac is Bloodshot. You know, you don't have to have this super buff guy, but you know, you get somebody like when they got John Bernthal to play the Punisher. I mean, most of these characters for Valiant are kind of an amalgamation of characters we know. Bloodshot is kind of Frankenstein meets the Punisher, just like Nim Jack is Batman James Bond, or Exo is Iron Man and Conan mixed together, which I actually kind of like. I like that idea. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was just sitting around in Jim Shooter's office when they created these characters. Like, all right, we need an Iron Man type character. We need something different. Well, what if it's kind of a Conan in an Iron Man suit? Okay, I love that. Let's go on. What about Batman? What if he's kind of a James Bond? Okay, we're good. Let's go with that. You know, I could see that happening. Now, but the movie didn't do horrible in the theater, but it didn't do great. It made $33.5 million at a time that everything was shutting down. But the film only cost $45 million, so there's a good chance they actually recouped their money on it, because the VOD, there wasn't a lot out there. There wasn't Black Widow and stuff like that. All that stuff would come out a year later. Birds of Prey had just come out, so there wasn't a lot of stuff to compete against it. People still wanted new movies, but there was nobody putting new movies out. So the fact that they went to VOD so quickly, they probably made most of their money back, at least there. Yeah, JD rented it. I rented it. I ended up picking up on 4K somewhere in my stack of movies because, like I said, I kind of enjoyed it, and I loved the Valiant Universe, so I wanted it. And I'm still hoping that they're going to do more with it, but DMG has sold the rights to different movies to different studios. So the great thing about Valiant being a cohesive universe gets destroyed when they go to different studios like that. Now, I'm not going to break down the histories of each individual title because that'll take too long. But what I will do is talk about some of their more popular characters, who they are, when they were created, who created them, and give you a little idea of what's going on with them. So if you're not a Valiant reader, you might go, oh, hey, Nim Jack, that sounds good for me. Or, that Archer and Armstrong, that's my jam. So let's dive into the characters, and we'll see where we get, because there's a lot of characters. So I'm going to hit some of the highlights. I won't be able to do all of them, but we'll see how that goes. Now let's start with my favorite, which is Nim Jack. Now the character was created by Mark Moretti and Joe Quesada, and he first appeared as Colin King in Bloodshot number 6 in 1993, and then as Nim Jack a month later in Bloodshot number 7. 6 and then number 7. Now, there are a few variations of him, and it's going to be that way with all these characters. There's kind of 3 generations of these characters, mostly. There's the original Valiant Comics phase. Then everything was kind of rebooted in the Acclaim days, and then rebooted again for Valiant Entertainment. The exception to that is a couple characters that were created specifically in the Valiant Entertainment days, and some characters that never got used in the Acclaim days. They just went from Valiant Comics, slept through Acclaim, and then popped up. So I'm really going to focus on what's going on with them in the Valiant Entertainment days. If you dig these characters, you can definitely dive back and see how they've changed. Now, Colin King is he was born wealthy. He's a British kid who grew up with money, And he trained to be a master spy and a ninja. He works as a freelance operative for MI6. And he has no superpowers, but he's highly intelligent, is a master level ninja, and is an expert with all forms of weaponry and tech. Now, the most recent incarnation came from Matt Kint, who teamed up with Clayman and Butch Geis to do a really interesting style comic. Is that they did two stories in one. There was the current day story, which was Clayman, and then Butch Geis did these flashback stories with Matt. Now, this all started in 2015, and the character had already started popping up again when Valiant relaunched as part of this group called Unity, which was the original name of the series that Image and Valiant did. Now it was being used as a team name in this kind of the Valiant's version of the Avengers. Now, from there, though, Nim Jack got some buzz back again, and then they brought him into his own series. And we learn some pretty interesting stuff. We learned that MI6 had been using ninjas since World War I. They had actually a secret ninja program. And the very first one was a guy named Ninja A, which that turns Nim Jack into a legacy character if you think about it. And the next series of characters, and yeah, so when the next series came out, they called it Ninja K instead of Nim Jack. And it was written by Christos Gage. And this focused on both King and his predecessors in the ninja programs. We got to dive into that. And then from there, Nim Jack Volume 4 was released in 2021. Now, this was the most recent series, and I've gotten to read it. And it was written by Jeff Parker and drawn by Javier Pulido. It featured King having kind of left the service of MI6. He was a freelancer, but he doesn't really want anything to do with it anymore. But the problem was that this group was able to learn all of MI6's secrets. They have this telepath who can then read secrets out of people's minds and start selling the secrets. Well, to prove that they could do this, they got all of MI secrets, code names, agents' names, and everything else, and just dumped them out there. So basically, it put all of MI6 agents in grave peril, which pretty much left it up to Nim Jack to try to fix it. Now, I really enjoyed the writing on the series, and I have no problem with Javier Pulido's art. I just don't think the two merge together well here. At least for me, when I read Nim Jack, I want a more action-based, more realistic style of art, and Javier is much more interpretive. It's much more indie style. So that was one, and it's probably one of the few knocks I have against anything Valiant right now, is I just didn't like the pairing of Javier's art with that story. So now let's go on. Next, we're going to talk about Bloodshot, who made his first appearance was a cameo in Eternal Warriors #4 in November of 1992. He did a full appearance in Rye. I think everybody pronounces that different. Rye #0 in the same month. So cameoed in Eternal Warrior, popped up in Rye, and there's some connections to Bloodshot and Rye, but they take place thousands of years apart. Bloodshot was created by Kevin Van Hook, who's this really sweet, nice guy. I talked to him a lot online. Don Perlin and Bob Layton. Now, focusing on the most recent version of Bloodshot, he's a soldier who died in battle only to be resurrected by nanites, making him the newest super soldier for Project Rising Spirit. And this is another legacy type character because this is a program that Rising Spirit has had since the start of World War II. Now, as part of the program, his brain gets filled with these memories to help control him. So they don't give him back his own memories. They kind of wipe his memories. And then they give him these very manipulated memories. And this is what is done in the movie as well, so that they then can play on those memories to get him to want to do these things. If they give him a child that they love and he misses, and then they have the bad guy they're going to send him after hurting children, they know he's going to be more dedicated to the task than if it was just, that guy stole money from us, we need you to kill him. So they mess with his head that way. He currently believes he is a guy named Ray Garrison. Well, he has the memories of Ray Garrison, a military operative specially trained to fight people with superhuman abilities, or what they call either harbingers or psyops in the Valiant Universe. But what he discovers is that his handlers have been playing with his memories. He does figure that out, and that he's neither Ray Garrison or Angelo Mortale, which was the first Bloodshot's name when it was Valiant Comics. So they brought that name back in. He ends up breaking away from Project Rising Spirit, and he doesn't want to be a living weapon or hunt down psyops for them. He hopes to find a life outside of the military. Now, this incarnation was actually written by Dwayne Zwerzinski, drawn by Arturo Lazzi and Manuel Garcia, and it ran for 27 issues. Then later, one of the best runs of Bloodshot came, called Bloodshot Reborn by Jeff Lemire and Miko Soyayan. And that lasted 18 issues, and there was a follow-up miniseries called Bloodshot USA, a one-shot called Bloodshot's Day Off, and then another 12 issues called Bloodshot Salvation, where Soyayan is joined by Luis La Rosa on the art. There was more recently another 8-issue series called Bloodshot Rising Spirit, and that was written by Kevin Graveau, who is the creator of the what was the name of that vampire series with Kate Beckinsale? It's like Romeo and Juliet with vampire movie. Kate Beckinsale in all leather. Kevin Graveau is the creator of that and the writer on that. He was also one of the big werewolves in it. Underworld, thank you. But he wrote with Lonnie Nadler and Zach Thompson, and then Ken Lashley did the art, and that came out in 2018. And then another series came out 2019, written by Tim Seeley and drawn by Brett Booth. So there's quite a bit of Bloodshot out there. There was a comment I missed. Mark says, I loved how Valiant introduced the concept of psionic abilities, having their powers activated through external and extraordinarily painful means. Yeah. And having two characters like Tomo Harada and Pete Stanchek be the people to activate these psyops is just because those are nice people. So I think that is also a really interesting take on it. So, all right, let's keep moving on. Actually, we need to take another quick break. So let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk about a few more characters and what they've got planned up. We'll be right back.
To be continued. 3 little words that hold the secret to the next great story. 3 words that will thrill you, confound you, give life to new possibilities. Every variation of To Be Continued is a promise of adventure, a promise of excitement, a promise of unseen wonders and unexplored worlds. A promise that every issue you read makes you a part of a never-ending journey, and behind every page there will be an unopened door waiting for you. This story to be continued at your local comic book shop today. Visit comicshoplocator.com today.
join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere the experience is all the time.
Hey everybody, welcome back. We are talking Valiant Comics, Valiant Entertainment. We are going through some of their bigger characters right now. We're going to get right back into it because I prepped a lot more for this episode than I think I needed. But getting back into it, Exo Man of War, created by Jim Shooter, Steve Englehart, Bob Layton, and Barry Windsor Smith, debuted in his own title in February of 1992. Now, this is the story of Auric of Dacia, heir to the throne of the Visigoths, and basically he's been at constant war his entire life with the Roman Empire, and this is all in 5th century Europe. But his life would take an even weirder turn as a group of these brutal aliens came down. They're called the Vine, and they abducted a bunch of Visigoths and took them back into deep space to serve as slaves. Now, on the Vine homeworld, Auric ends up leading a revolt against his alien captors. They raid a temple, and in doing so, Auric comes across one of their most powerful relics called Shanhara, which is a sentient suit of armor. Now, the Vine are able to overwhelm the revolt, killing most of them, but Auric is able to merge with the suit well enough. He doesn't know how to use it that well yet, but well enough that he's actually able to fly back to Earth, to use the suit to get home. The problem is, when he gets back home, he learns that due to the effect of time dilation, I know nothing about time dilation, so I'm going to go comics and some other day look that up, but 1,600 years has passed, and he's now in the 21st century. So everybody he knows is now long dead. And he's back on Earth. He's totally a man out of time. Oh, and the Vine want their relic back. So first they have a bunch of sleeper agents on Earth they send after him. Eventually, when that doesn't work, they send an armada in to invade Earth to get it back. And Exo Man of War has to fight it off. Eventually realizing that they're not going to stop, Exo decides to take, once he's good with the suit, takes the battle back to them, going back and destroying the Vine Empire. Now, the series was originally written by Robert Venditti and Kerry Nord, and then it was later passed on to Matt Kent with art by Tomas Giorello, Juan Jose Rip, Trevor Harson, Ryan Bodenheim, Ariel Olivetti, Clayton Cray, Renato Guidas, and Doug Braithwaite, all time dilation. The faster you move, the slower time follows you. Thank you, JD. So all those artists worked with Matt Kent on the series, and it was just a phenomenal run. Well worth checking out. The most recent series, though, featured this kind of new villain. I want to say he's kind of a betrayal villain, but it was a 9-episode series recently with Dennis Hopeless as a writer and Emilio Laszlo, I think it's his name, as the artist. I didn't write down the last name. But that was another really good run that just wrapped up recently. A book that's out right now is phenomenal, is Harbinger. And this was Valiant's first real team book, kind of X-Men-ish or New Mutants-ish. The team was created by Jim Shooter and Dave Lapham, and they focused on a group of teenage outcasts with superpowers. Now, the antagonist in this is Toyo Harada, a Japanese businessman that runs the Harbinger Foundation. And what the Harbinger Foundation does, it recruits these Harbingers or Psiots, I prefer the term Psiot, but these powered people, to make his own private army. Now, Harada is a Psiot himself, he's probably the most powerful Psiot on the planet, with telepathy, telekinesis, and mind control. Now, there's only one other person close to his level of power, and that's Peter Stanchik, who was originally a student of Harada's, but he broke away after learning that Harada had actually arranged to murder Peter's best friend. So Peter takes this codename of Sting and forms this group called the Renegades. And this is a group of psiots specifically to thwart the plans of the Harbinger Foundation. And some of them you'll recognize. The Renegades were Faith Herbert, also known as Zephyr, and she would end up getting her own series. She has telekinetic ability that actually allows her to fly. There's a pyrokinetic named Charlene Dupree, goes by the name of Flamingo. There's a super strong guy named John Torkelson, or Torque. Amanda McKee is known as Livewire. She's become a much bigger character over the last few years. She has the ability to manipulate electromagnetic forces. And there's Edward Sedgwick, or Stronghold, who could sonically absorb mass from objects around him to increase his own size and strength. There was one non-powered person named Chris Hathaway, who was a team member, and mainly she kind of kept everybody on the straight and narrow and kind of kept them focused. Now, Josh Dysart and Kari Evans started the modern take on this, but there's a series right now called The Harbinger, and it has recast. This is like after everything bad has happened. Peter Stanchek is back. He's in the city full of psiots who have been forced into their power, and he's becoming kind of a superhero to protect them. But what we learn is that he's only half the man he used to be, and you'll have to read the comics to find out more about that. But so he's taken up the name The Harbinger instead of going by the Sting. And the series is wonderful. It's written by Colin Kelly, Jackson Lansing, and it's got art by Robbie Rodriguez, and it's going on right now. And I do recommend that one. Now, I'm going to kind of speed up a bit here, try to hit a couple more. Artron Armstrong is a lighter hero duo originally created by Jim Shooter, Bob Layton, and Barry Windsor Smith again in July of '92. This features Aram Anipada, also known as Armstrong, and probably the one comic book character I could actually cosplay. He's one of three immortal brothers, the other two being Galad the Eternal Warrior and Ivar the Time Walker. Now, Armstrong is more bacchanalian than the other three. Oftentimes, or the other two, he's often drunk, carries a magical bag that's the equivalent of a D&D bag of holding, or Felix's magic bag if you're an old school cartoon guy. On the other hand, Obadiah Archer was this young kid born in Kansas who discovers that he has really amazing off-the-chart eye-hand coordination. But he finds out his parents, who are highly religious, are kidnapping children and molesting them from the church. And when he discovers this, he has to hide from his parents. He ends up joining a Buddhist monastery where he is given sanctuary and taught martial arts and archery. And the two of them hook up and become friends. Archer and Armstrong travel around doing adventures. It'd be a perfect 80s sitcom. Another hero duo they have is Quantum and Woody. And this was basically, they went to Christopher Priest and said, we want a Power Man and Iron Fist style of series. What can you do? He said, well, first thing, hire Mark Bright, or MD Bright, who was the artist on Power Man and Iron Fist, and then we'll do it. And what you've got is a pair of adoptive brothers, Eric and Woodrow Henderson, who, when their father gets murdered, they decide to investigate. Now, these two don't get along at all, but they decide to work together to investigate their father's murder, and only to accidentally get imbued with powers. They have the ability to shoot energy and generate shields, but the side effect is that they've got these metal bands on, and if they don't slap the bands together every 24 hours, they'll dissolve. By the way, there's a goat in this series, and the goat may be the best thing in any Valiant book, so you should check it out. Eric, of course, is the straight-laced one. Woody is the irresponsible one. They don't get along, which, again, makes for a great partnership. Other characters you should keep an eye out for. Rai is a human cyborg and spirit guardian protecting Japan in the 41st century. There's Punk Mambo, who has the ability to cross into the dead zone or dead side, which is going to be important coming up in the Book of Shadows. There's Eternal Warrior, Time Walker, Hardcore Armorclads. Armorclads is a new series. There's some really great stuff coming out, but there's 4 new titles. Got to do this quick. 4 new titles coming out. Nick says hit that thumbs up button. You don't want to mess with Nick. So hit the thumbs up, hit the like, hit the subscribe, please. Now, 4 titles coming out. Next month will be the launch of a new Artron Armstrong series called Artron Armstrong Forever, written by Steve Fox, drawn by Mauricio Fiorito. And this is when the carefree, hard-drinking, and immortal Armin Anipada, a.k.a. Armstrong, seemingly loses his ability to heal from any wound and believes his days as an immortal are finally coming to an end. His young and optimistic best friend, Obadiah Archer, will travel the world in search of mythical artifacts to save his dear friend. That's going to be a fun series. Those are always fun series when Archer and Armstrong get together. Colin Bunn and Ricardo Latina have a new book in July called The Book of Shadows. That's going to pick up where this one left off, the Shadow Man series, which I absolutely love, by the way. This is supernatural protectors of the Valiant Universe unite for the very first time to stand against a terrifying ancient threat. No one is safe, as Exarch Fane has his cold hands on the Book of Shadows. This series features Shadow Man, Punk Mambo, Eternal Warrior, Dr. Mirage, and some unannounced characters. So that's in July. We have, in September, we get more Bloodshot. Bloodshot Unleashed, written by Dennis Camp and art by John Davis Hunt. And this is going to be their first mature reader-only style story. Now, when living weapons break out of top secret facility, the nanite-infused super soldier Bloodshot must journey across the United States to stop these twisted and lethal creations from unleashing more bloodshed and devastation on the neglected small towns and forgotten corners of the country. Will Bloodshot need to kill all of them, or can some of them be redeemed, just like he was? And then finally, in November, we're going to get some more Exo Man of War, a new series called Unconquered, from writers Becky Cloonan and Michael Conrad, and art by Lim Sharp. Lim Sharp has been killing it over at DC. He's coming over to Valiant, so you're definitely going to want to check that out. That's Arc of Dacia is Exo Man of War, a relentless and brave warrior torn from the past who wields the most powerful sentient armor in the universe. When Exo's latest battle brings him into uncharted cosmic territory, he encounters a powerful enemy that will rip open old wounds and force Arc into treacherous, uncertain waters. All right, guys, that is about as much as I can jam into a episode about Valiant. If you guys like this, you want to know more about a specific Valiant character, let me know, and I can do a deep dive into individual characters and their history. Just let me know. JD says that Miss Jen talked to Dennis Camp about Bloodshot Unleashed a few weeks ago. There's a link there, so take a look at that if you want to find out more. Stick around. Right now, starting is going to be Comic Collectibles with Rex and John. They have some amazing books lined up, so you want to stick around for that. Say goodbye to the bear. We'll see you tomorrow to talk Moon Knight. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.